And welcome back to yet another edition of the I Prefer the 80s and 90s Sports Podcast, where I, Richard Harris, talk about why I prefer the sports of the 80s and 90s to today. Today's topic is baseball. Last night, the Arizona Diamondbacks clinched its first World Series berth since 2001 as they defeated the Philadelphia Phillies, shocking the world, shocking the Phillies, in Game 7 of the National League Championship Series. That's a mouthful. The Diamondbacks were led by their star, Corbin Carroll, put the team on his back and said, "Follow me." And a pitching performance by a pitcher whose last name is spelled Pfdaat. I don't even know how to pronounce that. Is it fat? Is it Fad? But he set the tone. He kept him in the game, and Carroll kept coming up with the hits. Marte. They just had everybody just play good, solid baseball. They are the poster child of the new rules in baseball. The new rules in baseball, people are taking a lap, giving themselves high fives today because the new rules helped Arizona get to where they are. Now you say, why do you prefer the 80s and 90s to this Texas Ranger Arizona Diamondback World Series? Because there's some similarities to the Texas Ranger Arizona Diamondback World Series with, let's say, the 1991 World Series, where it was the Minnesota Twins and the Atlanta Braves. Firstly, the Minnesota Twins and the Atlanta Braves were two teams that are coming off of 100 lost seasons within a few years of making it to the World Series. In fact, Atlanta was horrible for years until Atlanta got Smoltz, Glavine, Maddox, Avery. Although Avery wasn't on the team for the 91 success, I believe. But it was Smoltz, Glavine, Maddox. And we had not yet been introduced to the super phenom named Chipper Jones. But the Braves were built off their pitching, and they had a lot of good veteran players on that team, to my knowledge. The Twins had won the World Series, I believe, in 87. And so the Twins still had remnants of players from that team. Kent Hrbek, Kirby Puckett. But I believe in 91 they added, Jack Morris got added somewhere along the line and gave that team a stud. And essentially, 7 epic games, memorable games. The Kirby Puckett catch to rob the Braves of a home run and then get the game-winning hit with my man Jack Buck, may he rest in peace, says, "We'll see you tomorrow night." It was a World Series that introduced us to what we would learn to become the Atlanta Braves dynasty, because the Braves from 91 until like 2000 and something won like 14 divisions in a row, adding Dave Justice, Terry Pendleton was in and out, Ron Gant, and then of course Chipper Jones came later on, and the team just had guys who could play. Jeff Blauser, Mark Treadway, Otis Nixon. Like the Braves were in the World Series the next year against the Blue Jays. And so it was a start of something. And so Minnesota faded. I mean, they made the playoffs a lot in the 2000s. Joe Mauer's teams, Justin Morneau, super players. They just could not beat the Yankees. In fact, this year was the first time they won a playoff game in like 16 games, 13 games, something crazy number like that. And most of those losses were to the Yankees. And so that Minnesota team, that Braves team, kind of started to create its pedigree and become superpowers in their leagues. This World Series is bizarre because, in my opinion, as I was hearing someone say this yesterday, and I could not agree with him more, because that's what sports public does. The sports public wants specific matchups. They want to see matchups that will bring the whole country in. They don't want to see a regional matchup. And in baseball, baseball's weird because, let's say, I'll give you a good example. Last year's NBA Finals was Miami and Denver. Denver was clearly, well, I don't say clearly, Denver was the best team in the West. Miami didn't care about the regular season, brought their game in the postseason, and ran through the East, stunning Milwaukee, Boston, New York along the way. America cared about that series because it was one team really from the East and one team from the West. And so the middle of the country could pick sides and say, all right, we like Miami. We like Jimmy Butler. He used to play in the Midwest. He used to play for the Bulls. He used to play for Minnesota. Or they could say, we like Jokic. You like Murray. And so the finals ratings, I have no idea what there were, but I'm sure it was pretty good because it was an actual East versus West matchup. Last year's World Series, Philadelphia and Houston. It was intriguing because America hates Houston, and the Phillies are the Phillies. The Phillies are a team that I think America loves because the majority of its players are white, and they represent a style of baseball that was reminiscent of the Phillies of the 90s, where it was Darren Daulton and Lenny Dykstra and John Kruk. They had all those guys, and they were just like, beer drinking, baseball smashing, fun team to play and watch. Just like this team is. Now, I can't root for the Phillies because I'm a Met fan, but that's what Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber, they don't want to talk to you about the game. They just want to go out there and beat your brains out, drink a few beers, and do it again. But this year's World Series is different because Texas and Arizona are neighbors. And it's only representing the southwest of the country. And so, does Madison Avenue care about this World Series? Is there some player on either team that Madison Avenue is like, I want that guy, I want that guy's face on all my products? I mean, Corbin Carroll is going to be the rookie of the year. He's only a 23-year-old kid. The only reason why anyone would know about him is if you played baseball on the West Coast. But I watched Dodger games, I watched Angels games, and he didn't really do anything special in any of those games to make him stand out. I thought that if Alvarez from the Mets had kept hitting home runs, he would have been the Rookie of the Year. But he quieted down, and of course, the award's probably going to go to Carroll. My point simply is, someone was saying yesterday how people in big city USA may not want to watch a Texas Arizona World Series. I don't know if I disagree. But then if you don't watch, and this is why baseball is unique, if you don't watch, you might miss a World Series that could be as exciting as Minnesota and St. Louis was in the 80s, as Atlanta and Minnesota was in the 90s. Now, it's no different than Boston and the Mets, Texas against Arizona. The only difference is obvious, is because New York's involved. So if New York's involved in Boston, you have Massachusetts and New York who are rivals and, don't like each other. And so it brought that intensity. Plus, you had at that time Dwight Gooden and Roger Clemens, who were two polarizing guys who were both the best pitchers of those years. And people got into it all across the country. Are Texas and Arizona rivals? The Cowboys play the Cardinals 3 weeks ago, and the Cardinals stunned them. Cowboy fans are everywhere. Texas Rangers fans aren't everywhere. In fact, a few years ago, one of the smart things that ESPN did, I think the Cowboys played Arizona and they played them in Mexico, because both of those states border Mexico. And I'm sure, and as was evidenced that evening, there was a lot of fans representing both teams in Mexico. They're both states that have, I believe, voted Republican. Like they are brethren more than they are rivals. And so I'm fascinated to find out what America's reaction is going to be Friday night, because with basketball starting, college football still in full swing, hockey's in full swing. It'd be fascinating to see how game one is watched across the country. And then Saturday, game two, college football is really in full swing. You got a championship fight going on. Hockey's still there. Basketball is going to be more in full swing. More teams will be playing. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But it's funny because I remember in '87 when it was the Twins against the Cardinals, me and my suite mates at the University of Massachusetts, we started playing wiffle ball like crazy. And we were basically trying to imitate, well, I was trying to imitate the Twins, and I was doing play-by-play as if my opponent was the Cardinals. And we had so much fun. And actually, reality emulated reality, because we were playing, and Dan Gladden from the Twins hit a grand slam, and I was batting, and I hit a grand slam, and I was like, oh my God, I'm the Twins. But my point simply is, with baseball as opposed to the other sports, you can't judge it by where they're playing from. You have to judge it by what you see on the field. I remember it was a Super Bowl recently where it was Seattle versus Denver. And the only reason why the game was intriguing was Peyton Manning trying to win another Super Bowl. But Seattle, Denver, wasn't really palatable because they used to be in the same division together, and I don't know, just Seattle was up and coming, and so Denver was established, and then of course on the first play of the game, the guy snaps the ball at Peyton Manning's head. 50 points later, Seattle smashes Denver. And then Seattle the next year goes in the Super Bowl against the Patriots, and they make the dumbest play in the history of the game. And so I guess the question is this: is this the beginning of Arizona's rise? And the reason why I say it's not, and the reason why I am not as enthusiastic about this, because I do think this is a one and done type situation. Although I've been saying for the last couple of years, this pitcher Gallen from Arizona is a top 5 type pitcher, but he's been beaten up in this postseason. And obviously Corbin Carroll is great, and their lineup is filled with a lot of young, speedy guys, and they have the veteran Longoria over at third base. So he's the wrangler. But the National League is loaded. The Braves ain't going nowhere. Dodgers are going to be mad as heck next year if they'll make a few moves to get back to being who they are, and they'll get their pitchers back and really be on a mission. San Diego, for some crazy reason, just gave up their manager to the Giants. I mean, who knows what the Mets and the Cardinals are going to be like. I mean, it's not the same situation as when the Braves started their run as a young team, or Seattle started its run in football as a young team, because the head of the snake, no pun intended, of the Seattle team and the Atlanta team is somebody who is so impactful that he can carry them to victory. And the head of the snake for the Braves was their starting pitching. They had 4 guys, 3 guys, and they kept adding people. And they added Denny Nagel, and they added Mike Hampton, who kept the ball going. Arizona's starting pitcher is not why they're there. Arizona's starting pitching kept them in games, but they're in this World Series because they started running. They started stealing bases, and it's funny, the announcers for the first 4 games of the series kept saying, Corbin Carroll stole 50 bases this year. Why is he not running? And I guess word must have got down after game 4, because then all of a sudden he just started stealing bases. All of a sudden the whole team started stealing bases. And it basically kept them out of double play situations and kept innings alive, and they kept scoring runs. But here's what makes this World Series interesting. Texas. Texas had a run in the mid-2000s where they had some good teams. They've always had great players. Texas, my entire baseball career life, has always had good players. And I'm not talking about Mike Hargrove good. I'm talking like Juan Gonzalez. They had A-Rod play for them. I mean, Ruben Sierra. They had like superstar players. And I'm drawing a blank on his last name. That's why I haven't mentioned number 10 for them, who was just insane. Adrian Beltre was great for them. And the one thing Texas never had was pitching. And the rumor was that as the weather gets hot in Texas, everyone starts to wilt. And essentially, every year Texas would be great in April, great in May, good in June, and then start to die in August and September. And what I don't understand is that mantra lasted to them for a long time, and then all of a sudden they finally get to the World Series and they run up against Albert Pujols and the boys, And essentially, that basically killed that World Series run. This team is young and really, really good. They have, in my opinion, I think the American League, Michael Young, thank you. Michael Young was his name. They have the MVP of the league, not Ohtani. Corey Seager, when played, Texas was unbelievable. And it's funny, I was looking up statistics, and I was looking up that stealing base statistic, and the stealing base statistic, first half of the season, Texas ran. And then all of a sudden, they all just started getting hurt. Corey Seager got hurt trying to steal a base. And he got hurt trying to stretch a single to a double. And all that running stuff stopped. And they just flat out just started raking. Like they set a major league record this year, I believe, in for games scoring over 10 runs. I know they led the league in games scoring over 10 runs. I don't know if it was a major league record, but I think they had like a ton of them, over double digits of double-digit games. And for some crazy reason, the pitching came around, even though all their pitchers spent time on the disabled list. Andrew Heaney has been bouncing around the league the last few years. Ends up being an important piece to their pitching bullpen and rotation. Jacob deGrom, obviously out for the season. They had a guy named Perez who's out for the season. Eovaldi got hurt. He just came back, and now he's back being the stud that he was. I mean, Dunning has been up and down. He's hittable, but then there's days where he's not hittable. I mean, this World Series could be unbelievable because it could be a scoring fest. I don't think we've seen a scoring fest World Series in years. And I tell you another great part about this World Series is that weather won't be a factor. Because if it's too hot in Arizona, which it won't because we're now in October into November, the roof will be closed. And the same thing in Texas. The roof is closed. So for all those people who criticize and say America shouldn't watch this World Series because it's not New York, LA, or Chicago and Boston, or Florida and the Angels, you might miss something because this World Series could be exciting. This World Series could introduce us to players who we didn't know. We didn't know Adolis Garcia, although I believe he hit the home run in the All-Star game that won the All-Star game for the American League, to my knowledge. We know he was this good to carry a team in Houston, but they don't need him to carry him. They got Semien, who had a horrible year last year. This year he's rebounded. He was Toronto's best player and got paid bank, which I think is another funny aspect of this World Series too. Arizona is not a team that's got any player that is making $20 million. Unless Longoria is, and that is because of what? He wasn't as great in San Francisco as he was in Tampa. But they don't have any superstars except for Corbin Carroll, who made the All-Star team, and they put a microphone on him in the All-Star game, and, you know, he got to play in as an All-Star. But nobody on that team's making no more than $20 million. Texas, on the other hand, Semien has got a sick contract. Corey Seager's got one. deGrom's got one. Scherzer's got one, although the Mets are paying a lot of it. Eovaldi's got one. In fact, Texas Rangers, I believe, and I could be wrong about it. Now, Young made the All-Star team. He was the third baseman. Corey Seager made the All-Star team, but he got hurt. Simeon made the All-Star team, I believe. And so did Lowe. Didn't their whole infield make the All-Star team? Oh, that was the Braves All-Stars team. But I could have sworn their Rookie of the Year candidate, Young, made the All-Star team. Corey Seager, I believe, made the All-Star team, but he was hurt. I told you about Garcia getting the home run in the All-Star game to win it. Simeon, I think, made it as an alternate. And the catcher, Jonah Heim, is a stud too. Texas is loaded. And if I go back to my preseason pick for the World Series, I thought I put Texas versus Philadelphia, but I could be wrong. I think I might have said Yankees and the Cardinals. In fact, I did. But I remember writing about Texas in my preview. Should have stuck with my gut. But then again, everyone got hurt, so I would have backed off of it. But then Texas came out and did it. I'm babbling a lot today because I'm giving y'all perspectives from both sides of this as to why you should be watching it. And also it's basically saying that don't judge a book by its cover. Because, like I said, the 80s and 90s World Series that had weird combinations. First we had Milwaukee, St. Louis in the early 80s. Milwaukee was insane. They had Harvey's wall bangers. They were hitting home runs all over the place, and one game won 10-0. And nobody should have watched afterwards. But if you did, you would have missed the fact that the Cardinals came back to win. You had Baltimore and Philadelphia. They were regionally close to one another. Cal Ripken series, Eddie Murray series. Baltimore and Philadelphia was a good series. Good teams. Hall of Fame players. And then the Royals, people don't remember that the Royals were a great baseball team in the 80s. And they got to play the Cardinals. They had to finally beat the Yankees after all those years of losing to the Yankees in the playoffs. They get to the World Series and do damage in a I-90 series or whatever it's called, I-85 World Series against St. Louis. So don't think because if it's a regional thing that it can't be exciting. And that's what the difference is between baseball and other sports. For 20 years, 17 years, the NFC and football won 19 Super Bowls, 17 Super Bowls. They won 14 out of 17. Pittsburgh Steelers ended the streak. I remember this. The Raiders won the last one in 83 or 83. And then the NFC won every Super Bowl until I want to say Pittsburgh. But I'm trying to think who Pittsburgh. It can't be when Pittsburgh beat Seattle. Got to think about that. But it's my point is, in football, the NFC teams were so much better that you didn't care. Football, you don't care who's in the Super Bowl usually, because usually the two best teams usually get there, and if one team is hot and they get there, either they come back to earth like the Patriots did in '85 against the Bears, or they stay hot and win the whole darn thing, like Seattle did against Denver. Basketball, usually it's the same thing. The two best teams usually get there, or if not, definitely one of them gets there, and that one team smacks down that upstart team. But then again, we've never been blessed. We haven't been blessed with the basketball final matchup that we wanted since, LeBron against Kevin Durant, and then Kevin Durant and them smacked them, so then we didn't want that no more. We never got to see Kobe versus LeBron, which we wanted to see. We did see Magic against Michael. And so my point is, you take what you got and try to make the best of what you got. Because you may miss something if you don't watch it. Been talking a lot lately because I feel like, sports is this generation of sport is making me think more, making me talk myself out of things that I think. And until Texas and Arizona this weekend and this World Series shows me differently, I'll take a Game 7 of Minnesota and St. Louis, or Minnesota and the Braves, or Joe Carter and the Toronto Blue Jays beating the Phillies, or the Blue Jays beating the Braves. We'll take a whole bucket of that. Yankees, Mets, we'll take a whole bucket of that. Boston and Colorado. That was the most one-sided World Series that we've seen, because that was a pure example of what I just said, of how Boston was best team. They were getting mauled by the Yankees, and then all of a sudden they got hot and got to the championship, but they were still one of the two best teams in the league anyway. Colorado just got hot, got sizzling hot, and just rode the back of Matt Holliday and Vinny Castilla and got to the World Series and found out that there was a different level of baseball. And I'll stop after I say this. And this is what's been bad about all the interleague play. Texas plays Arizona in interleague play, and so they faced each other this year. And so there's no surprises. It's just a question of, was certain players healthy when they played the first time? We're going to find all that out over the next few days. But I'm a baseball fan, so I don't mind the regional game. It's the World Series. And Texas is trying to win their first, and Arizona is trying to win their second. But I still prefer the 80s and 90s.